Okay, so what I'm going to tell you today is one of the few concrete, relatively absolute truths about life. Most things are subjective, most things are relative to who you are, where you live, what's going on around you, what you were taught. Emotions are subjective, they are socially conditioned. However, at the core of them are things that are universally true to all people. And as far as I can tell, grieving is universally true. Now, people experience parts of grieving in different ways, and for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to use the old Kubler-Ross cycle of grieving, phases of grieving. And basically what that follows is first there's denial, then anger, then bargaining, then sadness, and then acceptance. Now, we know that they don't necessarily go in order, and we also know that not necessarily everyone experiences all of these parts of emotions, or each of the emotions. And to be sure, sometimes people experience them differently. But for my ends, this is adequate. Where I want to start is with denial. Denial is a defense mechanism, and we can replace it with many others. Repression, avoidance, sublimation, rationalization, right? Really any of them. Because they're all ways to deny the reality of grieving. Now, what are you denying? With this, generally people think of death, that this person died. But it's much broader than that. Any change implies death. Any change shows us that time is passing, and therefore implies that our end is coming. We know this unconsciously, but consciously it's hidden from us. Some part of our psyche denies this truth to our conscious mind. Now, there's a benefit to this because it allows us to live our life without being petrified of every snake and squirrel or thing that might hurt us, and it allows us to enjoy life in that sense. And so it's very important. And most people live most of their life not really worrying about death, and it's always at play unconsciously because we're continuously using different cultural artifacts to act as if we're not going to die. We act and treat things as if they matter, and those things protect us. This could be religion, it could be our political association, it could be us going out and hanging out with our buddies, watching football and drinking beer. We experience them as if they matter, and they do, because they give us a good life. And they are not absolutely concretely meaningful in that sense that they protect us from death. So if you're still with me at this point, the denial part of grieving is the part of us that allows us to live life without getting preoccupied with change and death. And what happens when that gets shattered, right? So here's an example. I'm 40. Someone else who's 40 dies. Oh, actually, this did just happen. A guy I went to high school with just died. And I spent an hour and a half trying to find out how he died, because I wanted to know. Was it health related? Was it a car accident? Do I have to worry about this? Right? Did I eat too much pizza this weekend? And it triggered me. Okay, so if you get past that, you will almost necessarily feel anger. So examples. People go to the hospital, they die. What does their family do? They always try to find someone to blame. Oh, they didn't eat well enough. Oh, the doctor was incompetent. Oh, I didn't get them there on time. This anger is trying to protect them from the fact that whether they live or die is highly kind of random. It's kind of random. There's a book called Man's Search for Meaning. It was by Irvin Frankl. Irvin Frankl was a Austrian Jewish psychoanalyst who wrote a book on finding meaning in life. He was then sent to Auschwitz, and he looked around and he saw the other prisoners. He saw many of them die because they gave up. He saw many of them die by sheer dumb luck. They were in the wrong place and the wrong Nazi was pissed off. And then, why did people live? Now, over the course of the years he was in the concentration camp, he lived because he had a purpose. And what was his purpose? It was for his own self-identity. He mattered to himself. But there's another meaning and moral that comes out of that story. Death is not something that we control. Although the anger, and we notice the functions of anger, functions of emotions, those functions are meant to give us strength and power to ward off death, but we can't. So you imagine at this point, you were acting as if it wasn't dangerous, that there's not a burglar or mob of people outside of your house. Your anger tries to defend you, then you realize the anger is not going to help. So what do you do next? You try to bargain with them. Well, what if I give you this? Or what if I try that? Or what if something else happens? We often grieve concrete things. Life and death. Sometimes it might be a job. Sometimes it might be a relationship. We also grieve stories. I remember being a kid watching the TV show Roseanne, and we watched that a ton through my childhood, and it ended, and I was really genuinely sad. It was a meaningful part of my life. But one of the things that also happens is, while that was a narrative about fictional people, we hold narratives about our lives, about who our parents are, about what our future will be, about how we view ourselves. These narratives are real in the sense of they are how we understand our reality. However, narratives are stories, and stories can be retold. You may have heard the story about the Indian guys in a room with an elephant. So there's 6 Indian guys, they're in a room with an elephant, and the lights are out. One guy grabs the tail and says, "Oh, it's long and furry." And another grabs the end of the trunk. He says, "No, it's slimy and there's 2 holes on it." And another one grabs this big floppy ear, another gets the dry elephant butt. And anyway, the point of the matter is there were 6 different narratives of what was in this room. And they were all a function of perspective of what they saw. So, as we grow up, as we are educated, we are socially attuned to what reality our culture and society tell us exists. You may have been taught that you should be a nice kid. You may have been taught that you should be a successful person. You may be taught that you have to stand up and fight. Those are all stories. They're all narratives. They're all helpful in some ways and harmful in others. And the point of the matter is, they aren't absolutely true. They're relatively true. And we can lose them, and we will grieve them. And we will bargain, back to the grieving cycle, to continue to be able to believe that the reality, that they stick, and we will work at accommodating them in our own life. But the fact of the matter is, at some point, we realize that it's not true. I very much appreciate the example of the movie The Matrix. If you recall, Neo had this sense that things were off and wrong all the days of his life, and he was searching. Now, he happened to be doing it on the internet, and the Matrix was an example of a reality that was constructed by someone else. He knew something was wrong, and he was given the opportunity to take the red pill or the blue pill, to experience something closer to reality, or to go back to ignorance is bliss. He chose to go into reality, and what he discovered was a life that was much, much more difficult and much more meaningful. He had scars, he could love more passionately, and what he did felt and seemed much more meaningful. We also remember the character Cypher. We remember that character was in the Matrix, came out of the Matrix, and then betrayed his friends because he wanted to go back. He wanted to forget. He wanted to go back to denial. And one of the things that we struggle with as people who are becoming self-aware and, quote, self-actualizing, we struggle with the endless urge to go back to denial, back to ignorance is bliss. The truth is we are complicated. The truth is our emotions are difficult. The truth is we have to find our own meaning and purpose. It can't be given. Once you stop bargaining, you may feel sad. Sadness is my favorite emotion. I don't love being sad. I don't like being sad. But I deeply appreciate sadness, and I love sadness. As a young person, I lived in this world in a life that felt empty and meaningless. I was depressed for a long time. There is a depression symptom called anhedonia. And if you look at the word, the A means not, and hedonia is the root to hedonism. So you don't feel any pleasure. Life has lost its flavor. There's no meaning in the things that I did. And then at one point, years went by, I realized the validating function of sadness is that something mattered. It mattered to me. A person mattered to me. The story mattered to me. Feeling sad and allowing the grieving to happen for lost stories and narratives, for the lost innocence of childhood, for the lost ease of believing the stories and narratives that you were told about your life. You could even feel this if you were a kid and you were bullied and you held a narrative about yourself about being stupid and you let it go, right? You would think, obviously, rationally, that why would I want to believe that? But it was a story that gave a form to your life. It made sense out of your experiences. So, when you grieve, it's easy to feel lost, to feel confused, to not know where to go. But I tell you, what you have are all the facts that come together to formulate a new story. The last part of grieving is acceptance. Acceptance that you were told a story, acceptance that you have a whole series of facts, acceptance of the fact that, in a way, you were deceived, self-deceived, deceived by the best intentions of others, deceived by people trying to help you be, quote, successful, whatever that meant. But deceived has a connotation that's not fair. What you saw was simplistic. It didn't allow for all the factors. It was a story that allowed you to survive. And I hope that you survived well. Acceptance is what we have to search for. You don't have to like it. You don't have to approve of it. But you do have to accept it, or you shall remain grieving. You shall remain in denial. You'll be angry. You'll be sad. You'll be bargaining. Right? And you will have no opportunity to truly be yourself, your best self, the self of your potentials. So, if you're in the grieving stages, if you're actively grieving, I encourage you to spend time there, to be curious. For as much as sadness hurts because you lost something, it tells you what is meaningful. And as you look at different parts of your story, you will see different meaningful parts of your life. I encourage you to think about bargaining. It encourages you to be creative. It encourages you to see the different shades of gray, to say, well, what about this? What about that? How do I make sense of it? I encourage you to allow the anger, the injustice, to empower you. Anger is an emotion meant to give you strength. If you're like Sisyphus and you're rolling your hill up the mountain over and over again because you're doomed to a life of repetition, use your anger to give you strength, to push forward, to be like Viktor Frankl and use your anger for your own self-identity. You may be determined or have fate give you a certain life. You didn't choose who your parents were, you didn't choose your gender, you didn't choose your basic IQ, you didn't choose what country you grew up in, right? These are facts. But what you do get to choose is whether or not you are willing to and will accept being you. So I hope this sits with you. There is a gravity in this conversation that is extraordinarily heavy and meaningful. Thank you.